You will come or asked to be recognized during the time the Wildlife Committee is discussing its agenda. If it's something else, then we'll do that at the appropriate time. If you're going to address the commission, come to the front of the room where the microphone is located, state your name, and if you represent a group, the name of that group, or what your purpose is to address the commission. Now, we've got a long agenda today. This is, of course, a season-setting meeting, and so we'll try to recognize everyone that's present, but keep in mind that keep your comments as short and as relevant as you can. If not, then I'll reserve the right to limit your amount of time that you'll be speaking. So hopefully that won't happen. Before we get into the actual meeting, I want to make a couple of comments. And on behalf of the entire commission, Nat, we want to thank you. Nat Johnson, as everybody knows, Nat's done a yeoman's job this year working with the legislature, representing the interests of the commission and keeping up with over 100 bills that pertain to the TWRA that went through. No extra pay, spent long hours. A lot of times he was down at the Capitol well after 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and has done a great job in keeping everyone informed of the status of what was going on. And to say the least, it's been a challenging year. But Nat, we appreciate all your efforts, and just wanted to thank you and let you know how much we appreciate you. Okay, we will go first to the Wildlife Management Committee and Commissioner Schuster.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Let's begin with the 2012-2013 hunting season recommendations, and the Wildlife Committee recognizes Daryl Ratajczak, Chief of the Wildlife Division.
Thank you, Commissioner Schuster. Well, today is our big day with the Wildlife Committee. Today and tomorrow, the Commission will hear a number of proclamations in which we set our hunting seasons. And if I may, I will get started. And we'll go through, as you recall, last month we brought forward the agency recommendations to a number of proclamations which do set our hunting and trapping seasons. And what I'd like to do today is go through those proclamations, just reaffirm what we recommended last year, as well as address certain issues that have arisen. After we provided those recommendations, we opened it to a public comment period, and we received a number of comments, and we've addressed those concerns as much as possible. And in some of those areas where we believe it's warranted that there's further discussion, we'll expand and allow further discussion in those areas. I myself will present 4 or 5 of the proclamations, and then towards the end we get into a few proclamations that come out of our law enforcement division, and I will call up Steve Nifong, our Assistant Chief of Law Enforcement, and he'll introduce the Manner and Means Proclamation. Now, the proclamations and the issues we'd like to discuss today, I want to give you just a brief list of what we're going to go over in the next few hours. And I must remind you that the Wildlife Committee should take action and vote on these at today's committee meeting. The first proclamation we're going to talk about is Proclamation 12-06, which is the statewide big game hunting seasons. Obviously, I'm going to go over the highlights of our recommended changes, but there were some other issues that I believe we need to address. The first being the deer season closing date. There's been lots of public comments from our initial public comment period, as well as concerns from the commissioners about the closing of the whitetail deer season. I also want to inform you of some concerns that we received from the Cocke County deer hunters. At that point in time, when we get to there, I may call and defer to Region 4 to address what was discussed at that particular meeting. And then I want to clarify some things regarding the incidental take of wild hogs during bear season. After we do the big game proclamation, we're going to have to discuss the quail seasons and an issue that arose last month. the commission actually acted and made an amendment to Proclamation 11-06, which created a new proclamation, Proclamation 12-11, which is the small game seasons. And so we just want to make sure we're going to bring that forward in front of the commission again, make sure the wording in that proclamation is exactly how you guys want it. Then we're going to jump back and discuss our wildlife management hunting areas, hunting seasons. Obviously, I'm going to go over the highlights of our changes, as well as address certain topics that we believe are of extreme importance. Obviously, we're instituting a wild hog control season on Catoosa and Skinner Mountain, but we'll talk about that wild hog control season. We also need to discuss a certain issue on South Cherokee regarding the raccoon season. And then lastly, regarding the WMAs, we want to talk briefly about North Chickamauga Creek waterfowl seasons. When we're done with that proclamation, we'll proceed to the National Wildlife Refuge proclamation, which thankfully there's really no big changes. I'll just go over the highlights of that proclamation. Then I need to introduce two new proclamations. You didn't hear about them last month because all these proclamations, the next two, all they simply do is repeal past proclamations. This first one is in regards to our cervid carcass importation proclamation. The next one is in regards to the statewide elk seasons. I already fielded a phone call today where someone saw the agenda and they thought we were repealing the elk seasons, and I assured them they're still there. We're just moving them into the big game proclamation. And then at this point in time, we'll revert to the law enforcement proclamations and discuss a real small change in our raptor proclamation. And I'll show you what the highlight of that is. And then lastly, Steve Nifong, like you said, will wrap up our proclamations with the Manner and Means proclamation. And we'll just go over the highlights of those recommended changes. So to kick things off, we're going to start with Proclamation 12-06, which is the statewide big game hunting seasons. Give you a brief summary of our recommended changes from last month. We did want to standardize the dates throughout that proclamation. We also asked that we increase the antlerless bag limits in Unit B during the archery and muzzleloader seasons. We're going to increase gun opportunities in Units A and B, and we also wanted to expand the red deer season in Claiborne County. Just to give you an idea in more detail what exactly we have proposed, if you looked at the table in the big game proclamation, the first recommendation was to increase the antler limits in Unit B. And so what we'd do is during the archery season in Unit B, we'd expand, we'd liberalize the season from 2 antlerless deer to 4 antlerless deer. And in the muzzleloader season, we'd remove the part that says C-Section C and replace it with 1 antlerless deer for all Unit B hunters during the muzzleloader season. If you recall what that C-Section C was, there are certain counties within Unit B that allowed a 14-day season, some allowed a 5-day season. We're just going to allow the entire 14-day season for all of Unit B, so that'll definitely clear things up. Our agency biologists believe that the increased opportunities will not have any negative impact to the resource. Now, there has been concern, and some of you may have known about it, but the Cock County hunters have gotten together and they requested a meeting. And if I could call up on someone from Region 4 just to comment and just to show the commission that our agency does address the public. When they get together in unison and express a concern, we do address it. If someone from Region 4 wouldn't mind addressing the commission and inform them what occurred.
Dan Gibbs, biologist from Region 4. And Daryl's correct. We had some phone calls come in the Nashville office, and we met last Thursday with 3 hunters from Cock County, and they had done a survey, and there were some issues with the survey, and we tried to explain that to them about how they went about it. But basically, they handed some paper out to people, places like Bass Pro Shops, some other areas, to ask about 8 to 10 yes or no questions, and they had some pretty what I call disturbing answers. 93% of the people don't think we're paying attention to what the hunters in Unit B want and things like this. So we try to explain to them about our survey, which Daryl gave a good presentation of that last time, and how that's always a random survey, and it's much better than just walking up to people. Excuse me, I'm dealing with some allergies here in Middle Tennessee, but they had several concerns. First being, they felt like that as we've been increasing our opportunity for take, whether it be does or bucks in Cotton County and Unit B, that the harvest hasn't been keeping up with those opportunities. And I explained to them, just because you increase opportunity doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a big increase in harvest. And we see that in Unit L and other counties. That first year we may get a big kick, but then it drops back down. And we showed them some data showing the long-term trends of harvest in Cotton County and in Unit B. And then they were also concerned about the quote was, no one should be able to kill 6 deer. And I didn't know, I didn't realize at the time if they were talking about adding these 2 antlerless deer in archery, or if they were talking about the current bag limit, which would be 7 deer. But either way, I showed them some numbers, and in Cotton County, last year, 2011, only 6 hunters killed 5 deer in Cotton County. Nobody killed 6. As far as the buck limits go, 14 people killed 3 deer, or 3 antler bucks. And does, you could take up to 4 does in Cotton County last year. 2 people took 4, 1 person took 3, and 1 person took, or 26 people took 2. 288 took 1. So 228, excuse me. So we tried to show them that just because the bag limit is 6 or 3 per day in Unit L, not many people actually achieve that. So they weren't very happy at the end, and we talked to them about buck-doe ratios a little bit and invited them to go with us and do a survey this summer. Commissioner McMillan has been out on those with us, and I believe Commissioner Schuster has too. So hopefully, if they go with us on a survey, at least on the buck-to-doe ratio, they'll be able to see something, and seeing is believing for people usually. So that's it in a nutshell. And the last thing is, we did tell them that, one guy kept talking about the season length is too long. The season length is too long. You need to shorten it. You need to shorten it. And I told him what happened when we shortened it last year. Talking about going right back to where we were. And I said, we had 50-something people request longer days and 3 or 4 shorter seasons. I said, until that switches and we have a lot more people requesting a reduction in seasons, it's going to be a hard thing to do. So that's the meeting in a nutshell.
I appreciate it, Dan. The moral of that story was that we are meeting with our constituents whenever we feel it's warranted to have those public meetings. In keeping on with the deer season recommendations, last month the agency recommended no changes to the deer season dates. And to go through real quickly, just show what the traditional dates are. The season begins with archery on the 4th Saturday in September. Then we have the young sportsman on the last weekend in October. The muzzleloader begins the 3rd Saturday before Thanksgiving, and the gun season begins the 1st Saturday before Thanksgiving. And we recommended 2 years ago, and again we recommended this year, that the season would close on the New Year's holiday, January 1st. Now, we understand that there was many public comments and commission concern regarding reverting back to the seasons 2 years ago, in which it would end on the first full weekend in January. And that is a decision up to the commission. Our agency recommended the 1st, but we understand, and speaking on behalf of the biologists, there's no biological concern regarding the extra days during the deer season. However, I was asked to remind everyone that there's other seasons that we try to accommodate for with the small game seasons, and so that really warranted, that was really the justification for why we closed January 1st. Moving on through the deer regulations, the non-quota antlerless gun hunts. What we did is we standardized the dates in that hunt table, and we added some hunts in Campbell, Jackson, Morgan, and Scott County. I just wanted to make everyone aware that we did remove a hunt from White County. And lastly, regarding deer, the red deer season, we did recommend a change in that we had run the red deer season concurrent with the statewide deer season. Last year, I believe it was about a 10-day or a 14-day season in mid-January, and this year we want to run it fully on with whitetail deer season. We also wanted to expand the area to make sure that those red deer that are out there are exposed to are exposed to the hunters during that time period. We also want to require that those red deer be checked in at specific TWRA check stations. So those were all the whitetail deer recommendations. If you'd like to discuss any of those, I'd be happy to entertain any questions before I move on to the bear.
I'd like to make the motion that we do as we planned it in the April meeting to extend the whitetail deer season until the first full weekend of January after the 1st.
Second.
Second, is there any discussion from the audience on that? Discussion from the commission, any more discussion on that? All right, those in favor of amending Proclamation 12-06, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes carry, and the amendment to Proclamation 12-06 passes. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, I will continue on with the big game proclamation, in which we switch gears a little bit and start talking about the black bear recommendations. Brief summary of the highlights of our recommendations. Pretty simple. We wanted to liberalize the bear seasons, and we're also going to increase the number of dog training days. Just to give you an idea exactly what we had proposed from last month. If you look at the bear seasons, we added 1 day to the following dog hunt. Instead of going from October 29th to November 1st, we're going to extend that to the 2nd. We would also like to add 11 days to the following hunt. Instead of ending on December 12th, we would take this bear hunt all the way up to December 23rd. It's pretty much the entire, all the bear counties are included in that except Monroe and Polk. The reason we didn't include Monroe and Polk in this change here is because we're changing some dates. We're adding dates to Monroe and Polk in another area. We're adding 9 days to Monroe and Polk County. If you look at the changes that we did make in that area, we used to have 2 weekend hunts. Now we want to fill in those days. So it'd be a full, I believe it's a 9-day hunt there now. But we'd also like to add a late season hunt, December 29th to January 1st. The reason we're doing these hunts this way is to really sync up the bear opportunities in Monroe and Polk County with the South Cherokee bear hunting opportunities. All the other bear seasons will remain the same as they were last year. The one thing that I felt necessary that we need to stress to the commission is that according to Proclamation 11-21, this is the proclamation that declares non-protected and species deemed destructive, otherwise known as the Wild Hog Proclamation that many folks refer to. Within that proclamation 11-21, it states wild hogs may be taken incidental to scheduled bear dog hunts in the counties or portions of counties open to bear dog hunting in the current big game hunting season proclamations. So in light of that statement there, and in light of all the expansions that we've done in the bear seasons, we have expanded greatly the opportunity for hunters to kill hogs, especially to kill hogs when they're out there on a bear dog hunt. There was a question about whether or not we need to add this information into the big game proclamation, because redundancy is good to a certain point. We want to make sure that public knows it's crystal clear what they are allowed to do and not to do. But one of our concerns is if we add it in too many different proclamations, if a regulation ever changes and it's in multiple proclamations, we've got to open up multiple proclamations to make the change. So we felt it best just to leave this statement as is in the Wild Hog Proclamation, and we're going to make sure it's crystal clear in our hunting guide, and we'll definitely reinforce what the regulations are in our hunting guide so the public knows exactly what they can and can't do. Another question that has arisen as of late is whether or not a bear hunter who has filled his quota, now keep in mind bear hunters have a annual bag limit of 1 bear per season. If they kill that bear, would they be able to continue to carry a gun and kill hogs after he filled his quota? And the one thing I want to stress is no. According to our Manner and Means Proclamation, we do address that particular situation very distinctly, in which we say hunters who have filled their seasonal or daily bag limit for any species may continue to accompany other hunters provided they're not in possession of any ammunition or weapon. And so that is, we had these discussions amongst the agency, and we felt if we allowed someone to continue to carry a gun after they filled their bear quota, they'd more or less be hog hunting, and we don't have any hog seasons. And so that was the final decision amongst the agency to maintain that if they kill a bear, they would not be able to carry their gun with them. Are there any questions on that particular issue?
I understand where staff is coming from and no qualms there. If we get the chance in the next commissionship, may like to discuss it a little further, just to understand a little better, because I'm afraid we're unintentionally creating, seeing who's going to tag what bear if somebody wanted to continue hog hunting. And that's my only concern, but that's for another day.
Okay. Just to round out the black bear season recommendations, we also increased greatly the bear training seasons. We recommended to add 14 days to the following training season. Instead of ending on September 16th, we would like to extend this to September 30th. And we're going to add 4 days down in the Monroe and Polk County area to go from September 5th through the 14th instead of the original 6 to 11. Now, the one thing I do want to remind the commission is that we are inserting there, it's during daylight hours only, and that is because that is set in TCA. Hunting is during daylight hours only. I'm not going to talk much about the Cumberland Plateau, other than throughout the last 6 months, there's been much discussions about potential bear seasons on the Cumberland Plateau. And what we did, and this goes in line with what Region 4 has done with the County deer hunters, we had some public meetings up on the Cumberland Plateau to really discuss with our constituents and our hunters and the public in general what they'd like to see us do up on the plateau. And there's wide support of managing 4 bears up on the Cumberland Plateau. So at this point in time, we don't have a recommendation for a bear season up there. And we did hold those 2 public meetings in Fentress and Pickett County, which Commissioner Bledsoe was a part of, and we thank him for that. But just wanted to show that we are trying to address the public concerns regarding our wildlife. Are there any questions or anything on bear recommendations? All right, now it gets easy. Regarding the 2012 elk seasons, as you recall, you've already passed the elk seasons in a prior proclamation. All we're simply doing with the elk seasons is moving that proclamation into the big game proclamation, so we'll set all of our big game seasons at the same time next year. And the other good thing with this is by making this move, we'll also conduct the elk drawing at a different time of the year next year. As you know, it's currently, the application period for the elk is currently ongoing. And the participation in that is not as much as we'd like to see. And we believe by moving that to the same time when people are applying for WMA drawings, that we're definitely going to see more and more people apply for the elk hunts next year. Any questions on the elk seasons? All right, last but not least is the wild turkey portion of the big game proclamation. Real quickly, the summary of the highlights is we recommended to allow archers to fill their county bag limits during the fall turkey season, and we simply adjusted fall turkey opportunities wherever appropriate. To give you a little bit more detail of what the turkey seasons will look like next year, in 2013, obviously there's no recommended changes to the season dates. So next year, the turkey season will run from March 30th through May 12th, with the young sportsman hunt on March 23rd and 24th. The bag limit will also remain the same, which is 1 bearded turkey per day, not to exceed 4. The same limit with the youth turkey, the young sportsman turkey hunt. The one thing I did want to add, Commissioner Cannon recommended that we really clarify the shooting hours for turkey. And unbeknownst to me, and I've received more clarification, and we did clarify it more, the legal hours for shooting turkeys is a half hour before sunrise to sunset. In most situations, legal hunting hours is a half hour before sunrise to a half hour after sunset. But for turkeys, it goes to sunset. This isn't a change, but we're making sure it's crystal clear. If we look at the wild turkey fall bag limits, this change to allow archers to harvest their county bag limit. The wording previously was that if the county was listed in the table, you could kill a turkey with archery equipment during the one turkey during the deer archery season only. We're striking that language and we're replacing it with the following. If a county is listed in the table, turkey may be harvested with archery equipment during the deer archery only season. Turkeys harvested during the deer archery only season count toward the county bag limit. This way, if a county is open for 2, 3, 6 birds, an archery hunter is able to take that entire bag limit if they so choose. And lastly, regarding the fall turkey hunts, the recommended changes to the fall turkey table, again, we standardized the dates to make them quote-unquote generic. We're adding hunts in Cumberland, Grundy, Hamilton, Madison, Putnam, Sequatchie, and Van Buren County. We're also increasing the limits in a number of the East Tennessee counties. And we did recommend reducing the bag limit in 3 counties, Giles, Lawrence, and Wayne County in southern Middle Tennessee. A little bit concerned with the turkey harvest in that area. And although this isn't part of the turkey section, it is the last thing in this proclamation. We did a clerical fix to remove wild hogs from the tagging requirements. And believe it or not, that summarizes the recommendations for the Big Game Proclamation for 2012.
Thank you, Daryl. We'll have discussion here in a moment. I'd like to make a motion that the Wildlife Committee pass Proclamation 12-06 concerning the 2012-2013 hunting season recommendations. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, is there any discussion?
But is it clear on the deer season where we've extended it that it's the first full
Yeah.
weekend?
Yes, in preparation, and I could show the commission, the way that it will read would be the gun season would run from the first Saturday before Thanksgiving through the first full weekend in January. And just so you know, in the hunting guide, we won't put that verbiage. We'll have the actual ending dates. So.
Great. Any discussion from the commission? Questions?
This proclamation has turkey in it, right? We brought up at the last meeting, and I want to bring it back up again, and I'm not saying I'm fixing to make a motion on the turkey going to 2 a day, but just let's throw that back out, because, you know, I know that the regions voted and the headquarters broke the tie. Explain to me again why you think that we should stay to the 1 bag limit on turkey instead of 2.
Generally, when we make a recommendation, it may not be full consensus, but the vast majority are within the agency are in favor of it. And this turkey issue has been discussed at length a number of times, and it's split. A few of the regions want to keep it as is. A few of them want to go to 2 birds per day. And the Nashville office, the Wildlife Division, kind of, I don't want to say we're the final vote, but we cast the vote in favor of not changing it. And the main reason, and if I speak incorrectly, please correct me, but the main reason is there is concern within all the southeastern states that they call it a southeastern turkey decline, because numerous states around Tennessee are seeing their turkey harvest start to go under. And they've actually hired a full-time biologist that's being paid through the National Wild Turkey Federation to investigate this turkey decline in the southeast. And Tennessee is that oddball. Our turkey harvest, in fact, we just ended the turkey season last week, and our turkey harvest, we're the 3rd highest turkey harvest on record. So nothing is going wrong in Tennessee. It's almost to the point where we don't want to upset that. If we liberalize, which 2 a day would liberalize, I don't want to see us having the results that some of the southeastern states are having, where their turkey harvest starts the downturn. And so we erred on the side of caution. There's definitely good arguments to say it wouldn't have an impact. And at this point in time, until they conclude that study that the southeastern states are conducting, which may take a few years, until we know for sure what's going on in those other states, it's like, don't rock the boat. That's literally our opinion on it.
Thank you.
Any?
Daryl, I believe we contributed to some kind of a cooperative effort on this turkey study?
Yes, great. How much do we contribute? $4,000 per year we are given to the National Wild Turkey Federation. all the southeastern states are chipping in, and they've hired a biologist to investigate what's going on in the southeast.
Any other discussion from the commission?
If I may interject, we just noticed by changing the deer season, we may have to change the young sportsman season, because the last young sportsman season is listed right here as the first weekend. No, we're good. It's listed as the first weekend after the close of the gun season, so we should be okay.
All right. Is that it for the commission by way of discussion? Audience, anyone who would like to discuss? Questions? All right. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes carry, and proclamation 12-06 passes. Thank you, Daryl.
All right, continuing on, but before we move on to WMAs, we want to bring forward the information. Last month, the agency brought forward all these proclamations to our hunting seasons, and there is a number of proclamations that we did not bring forward. In particular, we didn't have any recommendations for the small game seasons, dove, early migratory bird, or fur bearer, and so those proclamations were not discussed. However, there was some talk with the commission last month regarding the small game proclamation, and in particular the quail seasons. And what I'd like to do is just go over what occurred last month. There was a motion, and it passed in full commission, that you amended Proclamation 11-06, which is the small game hunting seasons. That's the proclamation that also contains the dove seasons. And what was voted on and passed last month is now part of a new proclamation, which is Proclamation 12-11, which is a small game proclamation, obviously. And the way it passed out of last month is that the quail seasons would be split as such, where on private land, the season would run from the first Saturday in November to the last day in February, and on public land, it would run from the first Saturday in November to the last day in January. And that was what came out of the commission last month. And I wanted to bring that forward and just make sure that you guys completely understand what this new how this new proclamation would read, and if you're comfortable with that new proclamation.
All right. Thanks, Daryl. Are there any questions from the commission?
I would probably like to see on the private land it changed to probably the 1st of December to the end of February.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Commissioner?
On the private land going to December 1 to the last day of February. What would that do?
To cut the days off in the front end?
Yes.
Pardon?
Losing that.
Yeah, I don't have it in my presentation here, and forgive me, Roger. There was, just to advise the commission, Roger sent me a graph, and I forgot to put it in this presentation, that shows participation rates throughout all 4 months throughout the quail season. And it is definitely, there's just as much participation on the front end as there is in the back end. And so it definitely would cause quite a stir.
Any other discussion on Proclamation 12-11? Questions from the audience? All right, I make a motion that the Wildlife Committee pass Proclamation 12-11 concerning statewide small game hunting seasons and bag limits, specifically concerning quail. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I think we've had all the discussion. Any audience, commission again? All right, those in favor say, whoops.
It's all small game.
Yeah, it's all small game. Daryl, is there, the quail is within the state small game proclamation, is there anything else going with that, or is this just that you need to discuss?
No, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Last month when this came up, there were some questions about other aspects of making this move. Because rabbit was tied to this as well, because we opened up early. and we discussed amongst our staff, we have no problems with the rabbit season open earlier as well. I believe our biggest concern with this, having the split between private land and public land, causes just a confusion problem when it pertains to wildlife management areas, because when a wildlife management area is open to statewide seasons, it follows the private land regulations. And so how we fix this would be quite an ordeal, and trying to make it clear what the closing date is on our WMAs. We'll have to do some work in the hunting guide to make this change.
So would you suggest we work on this, or we go ahead and pass it? What would be the best, what we'd like to have done? What would be the best recommendation to move forward with it?
Daryl?
Yes.
Sorry. If we were to leave this as is, do we have any way of judging if it's been successful or has helped?
Unfortunately, we don't have a good way to measure the response of quail. Obviously, with some of the other animals, deer, we have some way of estimating the populations. Quail are much trickier, and so gauging whether or not this has an impact one way or another will be very difficult. It's something that you can do on a small scale on a WMA, but a statewide recommendation like that, we don't have the information. The one thing we do have, and this was something that was brought up a few times, and I'm not going to have you read anything, but it was often questioned whether or not we were basing our recommendations on theory, what we believed would happen, or if there was actual science that supported this. And Roger Applegate, our quail coordinator, provided me with a short list. He had a much longer list. I pared it down, but there's definitely been some studies that have been done to show the impact of late season hunting on quail. In particular, and these are in very reputable magazines such as the Journal of Wildlife Management and a few other places. And so there's definitely been some work done that shows that it does have an impact, but we currently don't have any way to measure it now. Roger, if you would like to say anything to that regard.
Thank you. One comment I would make, and that is that, unfortunately, I don't have numbers sitting right here in front of me, which means right here in my head at the moment, exact statistics. But one of the things that we've gleaned from hunter surveys that we've done over the past about 20 years is that the vast majority of the hunting takes place on private land. And so, and like 70%, I think, sticks in my mind, but something in that neighborhood. So it's the vast majority of the hunting of quail that takes place is on private land as opposed to public land. So I don't know that we would be able to see much of a change relative to that, being on public land where it's a much smaller part of the hunting activity.
Thank you, Roger. Go ahead.
Mr. Applegate, are we trying to determine that if we shorten the season that we actually feel like it's going to help the quail population? I mean, has there been a pilot program in another state that would support this?
They've done this. They've done this experimentally in several places, and the most recent one was Florida, where they did a really large area in Central Florida, and they basically concluded that it improved the population level. What we know is we know enough about populations of quail and how they operate to know that basically what we're doing, anytime we're doing harvest and removal of any birds, that we're basically, and I think I've used this analogy a few times before, but it's kind of like a situation where you have a bank account and you put, you start your account with a certain amount of money, and it's able to accrue a certain amount of interest, and you spend the interest. But as you get to a point where you start to write bigger checks on that account, and you get to the point where you get less than the amount you originally have deposited, so you're actually spending your original base amount, obviously it all declines because you get less interest and so forth. And that's what we do with quail populations in these situations, is we spend our interest every year when we harvest birds out of the February period.
You stated that 70% of the hunting was on private land. Are these not, though, the people that are working hard to increase the habitat and improve the habitat?
We don't know, of course, who's doing what on particular lands. You know, these are just surveys that look across the board at the whole state. And so we can assume that some of that is because of people who might be hunting properties that they're doing management on, and others are just properties wherever there happen to be quail, just as a matter of
But
of
you
what
don't
the
think
land
by
use is
closing the
supporting.
WMA for 30 shorter days that we can do a survey of the state and see if the improved population on the map before we?
You know, again, the real problem we have is that one of the key issues that we have is there's no really good method to actually derive a population level of quail. There is, but it's very expensive at this point. That's the number one problem. The number two problem is that you can't do anything with any population, including quail, that you might do for 1 year or 2 years. You have to really do it for a long period of time.
But
And
the
so-
season's been the same for almost 30 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, and the decline has been for 30 years. You know, what we know of the population index that we know across the state and across the southeast. So, you know, the correlation doesn't necessarily prove that there's a direct relationship, but it certainly gives us the evidence to suspect there's based on the studies and things that we have seen that shows what
I guess
happens.
where I'm coming from is I'm not sure that hunting's necessarily the cause. I mean, I'm not a biologist and don't claim to be. I just know on my own private land, I wouldn't even hunt my coveys and I lost them. And I was trying to increase the habitat for them and still lost them. So I guess as my thoughts are,
Yeah.
if you take away the hunting opportunity, you take away the incentive for people to try to create habitat, and that's where we were last month.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Briggs?
A question for Daryl, with regard to making it a little simpler, I guess, on this regulation, would it help if we just established the season from whatever dates, and then just let the agency state in the hunting regulations what WMAs are closed to quail hunting?
Yeah, that's the intention of the small game statewide, of this proclamation, is to set the statewide season. And if we want to close it on a WMA, we could always close it on a WMA. We probably have to wait until next year, but it's our preference, I believe, as an agency, to have just one standard quail season and not have a split season. And we could take care of it. I'd imagine we'd take care of it next year if we feel there's too much going on our WMAs. We could close them on our WMAs, but it definitely would help us from a confusion standpoint, not to have two different a private land and a public land section in this proclamation.
Okay.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, my question is do we have a plan or a program for the quail? I mean, as an agency?
Yes, we've been working on it for 3 years now, and it's getting closer, and it's a hotly debated topic. We had a draft plan that we looked at about a year ago, and we had to go back to the drawing board. What it boils down to is we believe we know what needs to be done, but the question is, can we do it? Obviously, it's a habitat issue. We're really good at setting regulations and doing what we can with regulations, but when it comes to quail, they require very specific habitat. As you know, we only have control of our WMAs are literally what we have control over. What occurs on private land is out of our hands. And we have programs, we have, obviously Roger Applegate leads the quail program, but we have a private land program that goes out there. We have 4 biologists that work in the field trying to put habitat on the ground, and they do a fantastic job. And if you look at the numbers of the amount of habitat that they individually, those gentlemen do, it seems staggering. But then when you throw that over the entire state of Tennessee, it's just little drops in the bucket, and it's having no impact whatsoever on the quail. And we're having these discussions within our agency. What exactly do we need to do in the future in regards to quail? And we don't have the answer yet. We know ideally what needs to be done, but whether or not our agency has the ability to do those things is the big question that we're struggling with right now. We definitely can do things on our WMAs, and we currently do a lot of things on our WMAs, but on a statewide level, it may not be enough.
Would you rather just see the seasons opened up standard, normal?
Well, if you ask what the agency would like to see, our recommendation was not to open them up to the end of February. And if I
You had
could,
a preference. You got either or.
between the split
split
or
season?
the February, probably the end of February. But our recommendation would be the last day in January. And if I just want to explain why we put up such a fight, and I'm going to get on my soapbox real quick. The thing that our biologists do, and I want to give them credit, they're constantly doing their job, thinking about the resource and what to do. And oftentimes, we come before the commission and we recommend regulations that may impact the resource. We just liberalize bear seasons, we liberalize turkey and deer, and we liberalize seasons which may have a negative impact on the resource. And the reason we live with that is because if we screw up, we can fix it. The problem, what makes quail a different beast, so to speak, is that we're standing our ground on this, because if we recommend going to the end of February and it continues to contribute to the decline of quail, we don't know how to fix it. We can't go back and fix it. We've been trying to fix it for 30 or 40 years. And so my guys are really strong in their position, and I'm relaying what they're telling me. And it's their belief that this is the one thing that they could do, and that's why we recommended what we recommended. But if the commission decides, I believe the feeling would be, if I could look at the regional managers, you'd rather have the end of February or the split season. Go ahead, Alan.
I don't know if I'm speaking for all of them, or they all want to come up one at a time. The one thing, well, the thing that concerns me about private versus public, we've been striving for a long time to make things as simple as possible, and we've been trying to get any WMAs, and I'll just speak for Region 1, I'll let the other guys talk for their region. We've been trying to get as many as possible, just open with statewide seasons and bag limits. You don't have to have a hunting guide in your back pocket, especially now that it's 80 pages long, to figure out what's open and what's not. If we then have to say, on all those we've been striving to just say open with statewide seasons and bag limits, except quail, it throws another level of complexity in there. So I'd prefer just to strike private land, public land, just here's the quail
But do
season.
we not already have in some of the WMAs some exceptions to some?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But
I mean, I've read, except, you can have this
Right.
season except, so.
we do. But we have been working more and more toward trying to get as many as possible into just open with statewide seasons and bag limits. There are lots of them you can't do that for one reason or another. You can't have President's Island open with statewide seasons and bag limits. It isn't going to work. Reelfoot, you can't do anything at Reelfoot that's the same as the state. They do their own thing. But anyway, it would mess up things for every WMA that we've got open with statewide seasons and the bag limits, because every one of them would have to say except quail.
Daryl, you was saying a while ago that we have control of WMAs, right?
Yes.
Y'all have control of it. And y'all been in, what, a 3-year plan? Is that right? On quail, for quail?
Well, we've been working on the quail plan for 3
Okay,
years.
so you've been working on it for 3 years. You have control of the WMAs. What have you been doing on them to bring the quail back? And what have the numbers showed each of those 3 years? Are they declining? Are they raising? What's going on with that?
Roger, do you have?
Daryl, just a point of clarification. You've been, what I was hearing, and maybe I heard wrong, but you've been developing a plan for 3 years, but that plan has not been
Finalized.
embraced nor implemented yet. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's, just so you know what our intentions are, is to identify where more work could be done on WMAs and really create these focus areas where And the goal of that is if we have these focus areas on a few select WMAs, we can measure the response of quail and see what exactly needs to be done. But the fact that we're still evolving, and it's as problematic as it seems, it's more so within our agency trying to get this quail plan done and implemented.
Daryl, you answered one of my questions, and that was, is part of this plan to determine what areas are more conducive to restoring the quail and working, focusing your efforts in those areas and eliminating some that are not, so we don't have wasted efforts and wasted money.
Absolutely. In fact, we've done that legwork already. And we have in each region which areas are the most opportune areas for us to focus our efforts. And the problem is when you're looking at a statewide thing, it's a huge dollar amount to do this statewide. So we're really going to try to shrink it down, focus on a few select areas, see what can be done, see what the response is, to develop monitoring tools and monitoring methods so we can show that this work is actually doing something for quail, that we're seeing more quail or a higher amount of quail. And we've identified those areas, but we're still in our strategic planning process, and hopefully, I don't want to say it takes years and years, but sometimes it takes years and years to really make this change and start doing things differently. I believe the director wanted to.
Okay, as part of this plan, it seems to me that just common sense says that whatever areas you work in, part of your plan has to be a way of monitoring that to see if you're making any progress.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next, what can we as a commission do to help facilitate this plan, expedite the plan, any way you want to put it, to get something rolling as soon as possible, and yet make sure that it's not wasted money and wasted efforts?
Do you have a good answer for that? Other than telling us what to do?
That's kind of like the commercial with Farm Bureau. Charlie, he just got the question.
If you could contact Charlie, I'd appreciate it. But if I could just make a couple of comments about quail in general. The agency, as the public has for years, has noted that there's a problem with quail populations. They've been going down everywhere. Even some of the most intensively managed places in the United States have quail problems. The University of Tennessee, where the national field trials are held down at the Ames plantation, has had, quail has been their focus for years, and they have quail problems. So it's nothing new that there's a problem with quail in general. And as Daryl said, we relate most of it to habitat. A lot of us believe that there's some other something that we don't know about that's also involved in it. Now, it's yet to be recognized. I could speculate on any number of them, but I have no idea what that really might be. So, straying off for a second, my first job with the University of Tennessee was on quail study at the Ames plantation. All day, every day, all I did was walk fields in a grid pattern looking for nests, and then we would find those nests. We'd monitor everything that's in them. We would put heat probes in them so we knew the nest temperature. We took how many hatched, what the success rate was, what the number of times they renested. We went through the whole thing. That was, I hate to say it, like 43 years ago. I was 7 at the time. But 43 years ago, when that was going on, and we're still looking for the answers. Anyway, just to tell you that we'd follow that up then by coming back on a census route. We'd literally line people up across the field, and we'd walk the field and see how many singles and how many coveys. We'd document them, and we'd do that over a number of times to get some idea if quail population was going up or whether it was going down. There's also been over the years any number of ways where we would do call counts, and you had a route, and you would drive it, and you would see how many quail you heard calling, and you'd equate that one year to the next to see if it was up or down. But there's so many variables in it. If a person takes a field out of production or field changes or whatever, then that particular piece doesn't really equate anymore. So it's really difficult to get a good handle on it. There are a number of states who are working hard, and some that have had success on certain areas, and that relates back to what Daryl was saying on focus areas. And the focus areas, in general, would mean that we're going to pick a wildlife management area, not always, but we're going to pick a wildlife management area that has good surrounding lands around it, which is going to be private land, and try to make the focus area an area that can spill out into those others, but it's going to take cooperation of those other areas as well. So to answer your question, what the commission can do, I can tell you that the quail community, from my meetings with them and from what I hear from letters and phone calls, is they're not very happy with what seems to be a stalled effort. It did take about 3 years to put this quail plan together. The agency in total was involved in it. It's essentially sitting on a shelf right now until we figure out a couple of the other little parameters that we need to work with on it. But at that point, we really want to pick out those focus areas. One of the things that I've stressed to the staff is that when we roll this forward, I really don't want to put these focus areas out, put the money into it, it's going to do to manpower from all the things to manipulate the habitat, only to a year later to say, you know what, we should have picked a different focus area. So I really wanted to try to make sure we were on board with that. We're trying to do essentially plans for each wildlife management area, and we want to make sure that that fits into those, and all those fold into our strategic plan. So I know that, like working with some of the quail chapters around the state, they help us, they give us money, they give us manpower, and they really want something to happen, and they'd like for it to happen sooner than later, and I understand that. We've spent thousands and thousands of dollars over the last several years on quail, and I can't really tell you that it's made a difference. It certainly hadn't hurt anything, and a lot of those areas on individual private landowners through the Farm Bill and all the other things that help bring in federal funds for that, it's probably made a difference. In some areas, I know it has. But I guess to answer your question, what we're going to probably come back to you at some point in the near future, I hope, and say we may have to try to expand a budget within our budget isn't increasing. So we're going to have to say, in as much as we can in those areas where we can, we might need a budget expansion to do some focus areas on quail. But I want to make sure when I come to you that I've got a really good idea that those are going to be successful. I don't want to go into them with well, it might or it might not work, because that's kind of what's happened over the years in several other places. As far as the thing that's before you now on statewide seasons, to simplify things, if the commission would just set whatever you feel comfortable doing, the end of February or whatever that happens to be, if you just set statewide quail season, then we can handle that on the WMAs by either saying open with statewide season, or on specific areas we'll put what those dates are in there, and that's the way we do it now. So that wouldn't be a huge change. All we need from you really is to set the statewide quail season at whatever you think is the appropriate place to put it.
Go ahead, Daryl.
Director, I've got a question, please. I don't want to put no pressure on or nothing, but could we say that this time next year that you could come back to the commission to at least present a plan to the commission?
We could present the plan that we've put together now. As far as really telling you which the focus areas are, I'll make a commitment to you. We'll do our level best to bring those specific areas back to you, but we could present the quail plan at just about any time.
Well, I mean,
Was that a good
I
if?
wouldn't want you just to do that, but I'm just saying, at some point, I mean, within a year, could it be back to this commission with something? I mean, sometimes you crawl before you walk, and you walk before you run. At some point, that this thing can start.
I'll kind of look, but among our guys, you think within a year we can come back and say, here's our focus areas? I'm getting an affirmative from everybody, so yes, sir.
Thank you.
Y'all know you're being recorded. That head nod is showing up.
Is that all you had for me?
I've got a question for Cheryl, and I've never heard this. Can we table this in a committee meeting and bring it back up tomorrow in full commission? Because some of them up here can't vote on this issue. It's only committee only. Can we table this and move it to tomorrow? I know, that's what I'm saying, but everybody can vote tomorrow. In just a minute, only the people on the committee can vote.
The committee needs to send it to
You
committee.
would have to bring it, okay, thank you, okay.
All right.
Committee needs to send it to full commission.
All right, just, I had one more question. Ron Crabtree, could you come, I just had a quick question for you. And you know how, I think all of us are really wanting to support the quail hunter, and we know what a struggle it's been, and you know, several of us have talked to you and tried to find a solution. And my question is, we know that the private landowner is managing his property, specifically quail hunters, for quail, so he's putting a lot of time into it. And we think that by extending that, we're giving them that opportunity to hunt a little longer because they put so much effort into it. We don't want them to say, well, if we can't hunt, then we're just going to give up on it. But my question is, if they get to hunt for 2 months on land that they've developed for quail, and we know that February is the breeding time, critical breeding time for pairs, does that mean that even though that season's open, they're not going to, because they're conservationists and they want to see the quail come back, that they will not hunt at that time? I just want it clarified because I'm not quite sure on that.
Well, when we talk about quail hunters, when we talk about hunting, hunting does not necessarily mean shooting. They like to get out and work those dogs, and I think that may be a big difference there.
Okay, that explains it.
While I'm up here, you know the risk of giving me an answer.
I know, I was afraid to do it, but I just had to have that question answered.
To give you a little hope, with all this hopelessness we seem to hear, as all of you are some sort of business, and you know to be effective or to tell what kind of job you've done, or success or lack of success, you got to know where you're starting from. And there are a lot of methods employed in determining quail population. Missouri, for instance, got a one-page sheet where they tell you how to do it and the process. However, none of those there is no generally accepted industry standard for that. But there's a meeting coming up in June, and Roger can probably say which meeting it is. It's a meeting, I think, of Don McKenzie, who is the CEO, I guess you should say, of National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. I asked Don some time ago, what is the generally accepted industry standard for determining what quail population is? And he said, well, there really is none. And he enumerated the several that are used. But he said one of the big issues at this meeting, or objectives, is to determine one. So whether they will or not, I don't know. But we may have a way of answering this question, how many do we have? I know we've talked about all the challenges here, but you can generally believe that if something's been done before, it can be done again. And I don't know how many years ago this step-down plan was developed, but during that time, and I told you before, there's several of I believe it's 24 member states that are members of that organization. And during that time, several of those have implemented the step-down plan. Now, I'd be quick to add, quality takes time. And I do believe that the agency is committed, and there have been a lot of improvements. The biologists that were mentioned earlier, a big improvement. That was a big improvement in my opinion. Before that, a lot of that money was spent buying seed for people to put on private lands. And there was no way really to know where all that seed got where it was intended, but I'll leave it to your imagination, So in my opinion, this move that the agency made to use some of this money for the biologists, that was a good move. I think we're continuing to make progress, but as Chairman Brown pointed out one time in one of these discussions, at his age and my age, Director Carter, we don't have a lot of time, so let's keep moving, move faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate it.
Chairman Schuster,
Yes. Go ahead.
just a real quick comment. I think and Mr. Griggs, tell me if I'm wrong, but the intent was to give credit to those private property owners who are working so hard. And at the same time, I understand what staff is saying, give us one date. I'm not on the committee, but if I had words of encouragement, it'd be twofold. Number one, set it at the end of February, and giving them the flexibility to take care of the WMAs as they see appropriate. Number two is maybe the best gift we can give to staff is I think where Commissioner Wright was going, and that is let's set a deadline. We're not pig-headed, no pun or hurt to my hog friends here, but all seriousness, I'm gonna catch it. But let's set a goal. You know, this has been going on 3 years. There's been good study. If you come back and say we need 6 more months, we need 3 months, I don't think that this commission is so stubborn. If it takes just that extra time to get the right answer, I think this commission will support that. But we need to start with a deadline and get this ball rolling. That's just for what it's worth.
Thank you very much. So are we going to table this till tomorrow, or are we going to amend it?
So we have to take action.
Okay,
And they
so
could vote on it anyway.
do we need to amend it to extend the season, or just go ahead with the proclamation
it-
as?
You could just,
Okay. Well, where I ended was, do I have a second? To the proclamation 12-11. Right. Yeah, as stated.
I'll second it.
All right. Any more discussion? Audience? All right. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes carry, and proclamation 12-11 passes as stated. Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, we need to take a quick break. Thank you.